So it's what the problem we're trying to solve. It's not branding an organization, it's branding the problem and then becoming synonymous, which means the same as, the solution. And it takes a great deal of courage to own the problem for an organization because it means showing organizational vulnerability. Yeah? Why do we need more money? Because we haven't helped everybody yet. Yeah? We are not perfect. We are good at what we do, but we could be a lot better. We don't have enough money to do it properly. And then people say remarkable things. Like, if we tell people we don't have enough money, will they worry that we don't have enough money? And you go, yeah, that's the point. That's why they'll give you more money. Yeah, I'll come back to an example of that again. So depending on how the organization needs to communicate, there's 3 places the why can sit in terms of external communications. Option 1 is just lead with the problem. You quite simply get your why, it's the problem. The organization is the solution, it doesn't need any more explanation, and you just smack it out there, and this is the fastest way to grow fundraising income. Whether it is being brave enough to go to the United States of America in the year of Trump and say, join us in the fight to end slavery, and saying, you might think it's over, but actually it's bigger than it was 170 years ago. It's just Hispanic females, not black males now, that are in slavery. You have to be brave to do that, but they doubled their income by doing so, and they didn't hide from the horror. Slavery is real, it's massive, it's brutal, and it's also in our backyard, but you can be the generation that ends slavery in the world. They just tell it as it is. And there are problems that people think have been forgotten. Quite simply, you may be shocked to learn that leprosy is not a thing of the past, yet. Are you shocked that leprosy still exists? Because we are. If you're surprised at the number of people that still get leprosy, then you will be shocked to know that number is increasing. Once people know that, we can start fundraising. But it takes organizational courage. That's from my home country, Scotland. Let's slip back to Western Australia again, to the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in Western Australia. They'd had a fundraising nightmare for 10 years, which is a different story, different place. And they had to re-enter the market. What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's your why? The first one we heard was brilliant. The first time we said is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? The answer was the arrogant attitude of human beings. If we could just educate the population so they understand that animals are sentient and have emotions and feel pain too, then they'll come to feel empathy with animals all across the state. Yeah? And eventually animal cruelty will disappear. And we put it through the checklist and it hit none of them. Yeah? Come on, we need something much more immediate, much more powerful, and one that only the RSPCA can solve. It turns out the problem is Western Australia. Western Australia is about the size of Eastern Europe. And the RSPCA have got 11 inspectors. That's the problem. If you live near Perth and you're an animal being tortured, you might get saved. Anywhere else, you will suffer and die horribly. That's the problem we're trying to solve. Enter 6 months of organisation being really scared and saying things like, if we say that, will people think we can't cope? And the head of fundraising saying, we can't cope. Yeah? That's the problem. After 6 months, the chief executive said, I realised all I'm scared about is what are the press going to say, and all I have to say is, it's true, animals are suffering, dying, we need more money. And Marie, the head of fundraising, went, welcome to fundraising, David. Yeah? We can't cope, we need more money. Organisational vulnerability. 1% of the entire population of Western Australia gave in the first 24 hours of their relaunch. Not 1% of the list, 1% of the whole state, which is about 5% of all potential donors, and all they said was this. That's it. With brilliant donor care, with brilliant reach, with brilliant press and media art. Second, option 2, you can lead with a solution, but then you have to tell the problem in every story. So I'm going to flick back to my home country of Scotland now. Okay? You know that one thing about working internationally is you realize that stereotypes come from somewhere. Yeah? Romanian people really are pessimistic. Yeah? They really are. Well, what I found is that Scottish people really are gloomy. We look after our weather. Scottish people, you know, they do excitement like this. How are you today? Dreadful. Dreadful. And I met a guy from the board of the Children's Hospice Association Scotland. And he said to me, I don't know why you've been sent to see me, Alan. There's something wrong with the population of Scotland. And I went, what do you mean? He says, I think it must be these millennial whatchamacallits, because with the Children's Hospice and our income's going down and we're running a deficit, I think young people just hate children or something like that. And I said, hold on, you're targeting millennials for fundraising? He went, yeah, the advertising agency told us to do that. And I went, well, you're stupid then. Here's fundraising strategy in terms of targeting. Old people give, young people don't. Okay? So fundraising, target old people. How do we get young people to give? Wait. Yeah? Wait till they're old, then they'll give. Is that simple? I went, oh, right, okay. But but it's got to be something wrong in the population because our money's going down. And I said, let's do an audit. Fundraising's all about powerful emotional triggers. So let's look at your brand. Do you have any emotional triggers? Well, I don't know what you mean. Children, are children emotional? Oh, I suppose so. You know, hospice, dying children. Are dying children emotional? Oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Aye, that's emotional, right enough. Aye. Scotland, is that emotional? Because, well, I suppose it is to Scottish people. We're not targeting Kazakhstan, for God's sake, man. Right? To Scottish people, Scotland is emotional. And then he said, what about association? No, that's not. So your brand basically says, we are here for Scotland's dying children. There's nothing more emotional, man, than our dying children. There is nothing more emotional. Shall we see how you've put those powerful emotional triggers to use? And he went, aye. Oh. We've taken them all out. We've taken Children's Hospice in Scotland out, we've changed it to Chaz because someone told us we need a hashtag to raise money on the internet. And it's all about this thing, Chaz. Chaz does this, Chaz does this, Chaz does this. Non-profit narcissism. This is a charity that has hospices for dying children, and the main picture is an old woman with a broom. Yeah? Where I come from, we call those witches. Yeah? I'm getting your point, Alan. What do we do? And I says, we need to do some serious work. Your income's not going down because people don't care about dying children anymore. It goes down because your fundraising's terrible. All right. So then we get in a funny space, because we say to a whole group of people from Children's Hospice Association Scotland, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And everyone thinks this is going to be easy until you realise that all the children die. Never mind how much money you give, all the children that go to the hospice will die. And then suddenly it's not so easy to answer the question, what's the problem you're trying to solve? We can't stop them dying, that's why they're going to the hospice. So after a day of debate, the Children's Hospice Association of Scotland agreed that this is the problem they're trying to solve. For every one of Scotland's most unfortunate families, the final breath of their dying child should be as precious and memorable as the first. If you have the privilege to hold your own child in your arms when they take their final breath and pass away, and in that moment you know that your child was pain-free, you know your child had never been left alone, you know your child had experienced joy for a life that was just far too short, and most importantly of all, you know that your child knows that they were loved deeply until that final breath, then the hospice has succeeded. And the only other thing the hospice can do is ensure that the families remember the joy as well as the tragedy of the child's death for as long as they live. If you then change your why to keep the joy alive, you don't even need to say, even if you can't keep the child alive. Throw out visual rules, let every child scan their initial of their name in and make it part of your brand. Make the brand about the children. We can lead with the solution, but the problem for fundraising must still be the truth well told in every story. If you can convince your organization that the why is not for them, that you cannot think emotionally, you can only behave emotionally, and that vulnerability is strength, the three things the fundraiser brings, then you can do both. This is the Netherlands Society for Children with Disabilities. And with many organizations, to get to the why, say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? They can come up with 20 extremely quickly, but they can't decide on the most powerful one until the hard man breaks. This is their chief executive, Henk Willem Laan. He's a tough guy. He doesn't look like it there, but in his previous job, he was the managing partner of a firm of tax lawyers. Yeah? You do not get a more brutal job than being the managing partner of a firm of tax lawyers. Yeah? He sends people to jail for money. Okay? But now he's chief executive of this charity, and he told us the story, and it was in a collection of stories of why he was there. And it was when his son was born. His son was born, he was so badly disabled he could not play with his father for the first 2 years of his life. The condition that little Toin has, there are only 3 children in the whole of the Netherlands that have this condition. There's not even enough for a support group. But Henk Willem said that wasn't the worst bit, because took physical training for 2 years until he was strong enough to play with his dad. But it was when he was 4 and he went to school that it got really bad. And Henk Willem told us about dropping Toin off at school in the morning. His wife would drop Toin off at school in the morning, and then the afternoon Henk Willem would go to pick him up. And he said for the first couple of weeks it was the worst thing a father could see. Every day I got to the school gates and all the other children were playing in a great big group, and 20 or 30 meters away, all on his own, was my little boy, Toin. As a father, that's heartbreaking, and I presume it would be for any mothers too. And Henk Willem said, I thought this was disability discrimination and all kinds of things, so I went to see the school, and it wasn't. It was just ignorance. Toin's favourite game is peekaboo. He holds a handkerchief up and hides from people and walks up to them and goes, peekaboo! Peekaboo! But none of the other kids played peekaboo, so they thought Toin was trying to hide from them, so they left him alone. All it took was to teach a class of Dutch school children how to play peekaboo, and for the first time in his life, Toin didn't have to play on his own. At that moment, the organisation exploded. 50% of the room were parents of children with disabilities, and the other 50% were adults with disabilities who had previously been children with disabilities. And they agreed in less than a minute. The worst thing about being a child with a disability in a rich country is having to play on your own. And they also agreed that if you have other people to play with and you can play as a child, then you will actually solve all of these other problems. And they agreed instantly, so much so they're mixing their languages up. Yeah? They're not working in English or Dutch, it's a funny mix of them both. And they decided to focus on one very particular problem, the Speelpartnercampagne, the play partner campaign, so that no disabled child has to play alone. Highly focused. But then you still need to bring the problem solution alive through the stories. The most important 3 letters that Bram learned in school were H-O-I, hi in Dutch. He did not learn those from his teacher. True story, real photograph. David worked all on his own to build himself a Lego arm. Now he puts that arm around the shoulder of his friend Oliver. We don't always have to shake hands to make friends. And the one moment the organisation never looked back from. The teachers at my old school told me that I would never keep up with the rest. So the Gross Great Fundraisers play the big game, they also play the grave game. We did another great bit of work, which was personality testing, because we found 500 great fundraisers with at least 10 years of history. So we were able to do personality testing of those and throw those out into data world and get back what the personality types of the great fundraisers are. This was really interesting. So I'm sorry, we didn't over-index on intelligence. We're not actually any more clever than anybody else. We did over-index on empathy, caring about stuff, no surprise there. Yeah? But one thing we over-indexed on more than anything else, and this was a big surprise. Compared to the average personality, the great fundraisers over-indexed on toughness. Keeping going and making the tough decisions. We over-indexed against other directors and NGOs, and we actually over-indexed compared to our equivalents in the private sector. We were more tough, so we had to go back and look at this. Because I don't see fundraisers behaving like investment bankers and saying, oh, fire 100 people, we'll make an extra few thousand. I don't see fundraisers behaving like that. They didn't behave like that. They would make decisions that were just as tough, but it was for a very different reason. It wasn't because they didn't care, it was because they cared so much. If I don't make the hard decisions in fundraising, somebody will die, or we won't fulfill the mission, or somebody won't get an education. It was that link between the numbers now and the mission that they were successful at. And the other type of toughness, what does toughness mean? It means they care so much, they don't compromise. They know the job is so important, they won't compromise on important decisions just to keep people happy, or just to keep the peace. They won't avoid conflict with the press or internally because they know that if fundraisers compromise, people die. And what they were great at was this conversation, was other people saying, this is about the new ambition, the powerful new ambition, and other people saying it's more complicated than that, and the fundraiser saying, no, it's not. And other people saying people need to understand, and the fundraiser saying, no, they don't. Over and over and over again, until you retire, solve the problem, or die. The fundraiser's career. How do you build that resilience is not that we don't feel things, it's bounce back ability. The great fundraisers would take the rejection and then get back up and go to work. They would take the rejection, get back up and go to work and do it over and over and over again. And they were exceptional at that. Face down the fear over and over and over again. So I'm only scared of three things, which is rejection, flying, and public speaking. So I fly around the world doing seminars and fundraising. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I'm scared all the time. The only reason I don't look scared is I don't have another state. There is nothing to compare it to. And finally, it took me almost 50 years to realize that. Why do I not look scared? It's because I don't have a not scared state. It doesn't exist. The great fundraisers can also play the really long game. Can I take you to Cape Town, South Africa, and the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation? This is the NGO that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission set up by Tutu and Mandela at the end of the apartheid years. And it went well for a while, then it went wrong, then it went a bit better, then it went really wrong, then Zuma came along and it went really wrong. And they lost a lot of donors, and the country started to fall to bits again, so they decided, let's refresh the point and go again. It was that simple. Ask the question why and tell stories. Can you imagine being in a storytelling session with the people from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation? Can you imagine? When I was 4, back in the days of apartheid, me and my dad were going to the beach on the bus. I was excited and was messing with a beach ball I'd recently been given. Inevitably, I dropped it, and I remember watching it as it rolled down the aisle and into the whites only area. My dad went to fetch it, and they beat the shit out of him. It's the same problem. Despite decades of progress, South Africa is still a terribly divided nation. It's actually the same solution. Use the concept of nation building to bring us all together. It's just a lot harder than we thought. And when Stan, the chief executive, says, it's really important and it's really hard and it's going to take a long time, but imagine how we'll feel afterwards. We said to the room, how long will it take? How many people believe we'll achieve it in our lifetime? And nobody put their hand up. How many people believe our children will achieve it? Nobody put their hand up. How many people believe our grandchildren will achieve it? Nobody put their hand up. And then one person did and said, I'll put my hand up because I never thought we would end apartheid. And we did. So I think our grandchildren can. And based on that, they signed off on a 100-year fundraising campaign called the 100-Year Dream. The solution is unity. This is a dream and it will take a long time. Therefore, in 2019, the centenary of Mandela's birth, RJR will launch a 100-year campaign to unite South Africa and all its people. It's called the 100-Year Dream. And the fundraising proposition is so simple. Please give 100 Rand every month you are alive, and please leave 100,000 Rand in your will so the next generation can pick up where you left off. So we're talking about play the big game. Yeah? The fundraiser is the person who owns the why, and for a very long time they play the big game, they play the brave game, and they play the long game. Yeah? The good news is if you do those for long enough, what we now know is sometimes you win. We don't know why, but it seems to take 25 years for a fundraiser to win. All the great stories about the fundraiser that said, I was a great fundraiser and this is how the world changed, they all have a 25-year story. All of them. We can fund projects short term, but those big ones. So I would just like to talk about a win for 2 minutes while I finish. I started crying on an aeroplane last year, and it was an aeroplane from Bucharest to Amsterdam. And I'd been in Bucharest doing a fundraising training seminar, a full day, a 2-day masterclass, actually. And I was tired, but that wasn't why I started crying. It was because I realized something. And when I started professional fundraising slightly more than 25 years ago, we were raising a lot of money for UK organisations, but there were 3 overseas causes that my group were particularly raising a lot of money for. One was for Ethiopia to help them recover from the famines of the 1980s. Second was South Africa, where they were trying to rebuild the country after the ravages of apartheid. And the third country was Romania, where the Ceausescu regime had collapsed and we'd found hundreds of thousands of children locked up in the most hellish orphanages. The forced breeding program and no money to look after them and no competent adults. They were 3 big fundraising projects that I started my career with. And last year, 2018, I trained more than 1,000 professional fundraisers in South Africa, Ethiopia, and Romania to raise money from their emerging economies. And over that 25 years, I had never noticed the change. Until that moment. I thought, Christ, this was all worthwhile. Look at that. 25 years ago, I couldn't speak to people from Romania. I wasn't allowed. Or 30 years ago, I wasn't. What a change. 1,000 professional fundraisers in South Africa, Ethiopia, and Romania. And then it got even better. The demand in Romania was huge, so I went back again. And I spoke to someone for the second time. So the first time I'd spoken to this chap is from an organisation called Hope and Homes for Children, Romania. And they were set up 5 years ago by a British NGO called Hope and Homes for Children, UK. And back in 1991, their founder had set up with an impossible dream. The charity had only one purpose. We are going to close every orphanage in Romania. And it's going to take tens of millions of euros to do it, because every one of those 300, 400,000 children needs a house. They need a family that's got a job, that's medically safe, that's been through police safeguarding. There aren't enough families in Romania for them all at the moment. It's going to take an extremely long time to find a loving home for each of those children. But we raised money, we raised more money, they got to work, more children arrived, more children from the countryside were hit and came to these orphanages. We raised more money, we raised more money. Then I left, went on to do other things. They kept raising more, we kept in touch, we kept in touch. And over the years, they just kept going. And in May last year, I spoke to the chap from Hope and Homes Romania. And I was saying, so you're fundraising in Romania now for this? And he went, yeah, it's going well. And he said, the money raised across Northern and Western Europe over the years has been brilliant, but we're really determined to really increase fundraising in Romania, because there's now only 8,000 of those children left, and we're determined to raise the money to finish it ourselves. And that's really important to our national self-esteem. Romania has low national self-esteem. It's famous for it. And one of the reasons is the thing they're most famous for is half a generation of their children being in these orphanages. That was the images that were being around the world. And he said, for our country's self-esteem, we must say that we played a big part of putting that right. And being able to fundraise in Romania is a huge part of that. And I said, go for it. I'll be over the moon. 3 months later, I went back and he said, the fundraising's working. It's down to 6,000. By the end of 2019, we will shut the last orphanage. 25 years, 400 million euros later, a dream that 27, 28 years ago was impossible will actually be fulfilled. And the only person that can do that is a fundraiser. Ladies and gentlemen, dziękuję. Have a great conference.